Welcome back to Capital Conservatives. Today we're covering Senator John Kennedy grilling Fed Vice Chairman Barr over the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and the Biden regulators' failure to stop it. Let's break it down. Kennedy sets the trap with his signature Southern politeness, always hiding a sharp edge. He asks Barr about the 2022 Federal Reserve stress tests, 34 banks, all with assets over $100 billion, but not Silicon Valley Bank. Barr fumbles, blaming bureaucratic rules. Kennedy isn't buying it. No stress test, no red flags, no action.
Senator Kennedy, Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Chairman Barr, the Federal Reserve, stress tested 34 banks in 2022. Is that correct?
Senator, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but that
I have your report.
I have your
correct. Report. It says 34. And the cutoff was $100 billion. Is that right?
Yes.
You didn't stress test Silicon Valley Bank, did you?
No, under the Federal Reserve Board's rules that were put in place for transition into the stress testing, it takes a while for a firm to be considered above the threshold. They need to have a rolling four-quarter average.
Did you stress test Silicon Valley Bank in 2022?
No.
Okay. Silicon Valley Bank had $100 billion, more than $100 billion in assets at the end of 2021, did it not?
Senator, as I was explaining, that the transition rules in place at the time require a rolling four-quarter average to be above that amount.
Okay.
And then if the firm happens to be in a year that isn't the year that, since it's an every other year test, that a test is running, then it waits till the next year. So for Silicon Valley Bank, that would have meant 2024 would be its first stress test.
But the point is, you didn't test Silicon Valley Bank.
We did not apply a stress test to Silicon Valley Bank. It was, of course, using its own stress test.
Did you have the authority to do it?
Under our existing regulations, no. We would have to change our regulations to have that authority.
Segment 2. Exposing the excuses. Barr blames regulations, claiming the Fed needed new rules to act. But Kennedy points out Congress gave the Fed authority to stress test banks like SVB. They just didn't use it. Kennedy's frustration is clear. You chose not to stress test. If you had, would it have mattered? Barr admits he doesn't know. The man in charge of stability, unsure if oversight could have stopped a $200 billion collapse.
Under the Congress's amendment to Dodd-Frank, Senator Crapo talked about it, 2155, Section 252.3. Isn't it a fact that we gave the Federal Reserve the authority to stress test Silicon Valley Bank?
Under that legislation, the Federal Reserve could have put in place a rule defining the word periodic.
But you didn't.
In a different way than was done.
Right, but you didn't.
The Federal Reserve did not do that.
Okay. If you had stress tests, let me put it this way: if you had stress tested Silicon Valley Bank in 2022, it wouldn't have made any difference, would it?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Kennedy calmly grills the Fed, pointing out their stress tests miss the real threat: inflation, high interest rates, and government bond losses. Barr can't deny it. He agrees. Kennedy nails it. It's like testing for COVID and getting a test for cholera. He exposes what Americans feared. Regulators were testing for the wrong crisis.
Well, you didn't test for Silicon Valley Bank's problem. I've read your report. You stress tested these 34 banks for falling GDP, spike in unemployment, and defaults in commercial real estate. Isn't that correct?
Yes, in a typical adverse scenario for banks, we're testing falling interest rate
environments. But that wasn't our problem in 2022.
I completely agree with you.
It's not our problem today. The problem is inflation, high interest rate, and loss of value in government bonds, isn't it?
I completely agree with you.
So you stress tested in 2022 the wrong thing.
The stress test is not the primary way that the Federal Reserve or other regulators test for interest rate risk.
But you stress tested for the wrong thing.
As I said, Senator, I agree with you that it would be useful to test for higher rising interest rates. Why in our alternative scenario, multiple scenario that we put in place for this year's stress test, we do that. These decisions were made before I arrived, but I agree with you that it would be better to do that.
But it's like somebody going in for a test for COVID and getting a test for cholera, isn't it?
I don't know enough about either of those tests to know.
Yeah. Well, they're different.
Kennedy points out the Federal Reserve knew Silicon Valley Bank was overloaded with risky long-term bonds, yet did nothing. They saw the train coming and still stood on the tracks. That's not just incompetence. That's negligence. SVB's collapse shook public trust in America's banking system, and who paid for it? You, the taxpayer. The Biden administration and the Fed had every chance to act, and failed. For more truth and transparency, like and subscribe to Capital Conservatives.
So all this business about, well, the amendment to Dodd-Frank kept them from stress testing. The way I see it, you chose not to stress test, and if you had stress test Silicon Valley Bank, you wouldn't have caught the problem.
As I said, Senator, I agree with you that the statute requires periodic stress testing. The Federal Reserve made a decision about how to implement that in 2019.
Right.
That resulted in SVB not being planned to be tested until 2024. Well, but as I said, the stress test requirements...
You knew from the... I'm sorry to cut you off, but the chairman's going to cut me off in a second. But you knew, the Federal Reserve knew well in advance that Silicon Valley Bank had a problem with holding too much of its money in interest rate sensitive long government bonds, didn't you?
I think the investing public and the Federal Reserve, which cited it for interest rate risk problems, knew that it had interest rate risk.
Kennedy's message is clear. Enough excuses. Americans deserve accountability, not finger-pointing when crisis strikes. This is Capital Conservatives, where truth meets accountability.